Hey, what's up? Wednesday, July 3rd, 2024. I'm going to do a recap. I wrote a book, Baseball's comprehensive look at Babe Ruth stats, his box scores, 1914 to 1935. And I devoted a video to each year. 1914, separate video. 15, 16, all the way through 1935. I have an individual video highlighting Babe Ruth's box scores. This will be the last video on Babe Ruth, this book, because I want to recap highlights of his box scores. Okay? His best hitting streak between 1914 and 1935, he had a hitting streak of 26 games in 1921, 20 games in 1919, and 19 games in 1920. How about that? 26 game hitting streak. Pretty good. Of course, we know the record, right? Joe DiMaggio's 56 game hitting streak. Can you believe 56 games in a row? That's hard to believe. All right, as far as multi-hit games, do you know how many Babe Ruth had? Multi-hit, indicating 2 or more hits in a game. For his 22 years, he had 810 multi-hit games. I looked it up. His best year, he had 66 multi-hit games in 1924 season. And he had 63 games of multi-hit in 1931. How about that? 3 homer games. Babe did it 4 times. 3 homers in a game 4 times. 1926, 1928. Those are in the World Series. 1930 during the regular season, and then 1935 his last season. He goes out with a bang, 3 homers. Remember? Homers 7-12, 7-13, and 7-14. Out with a bang. How about that? Two homer games. 2 home runs in a game for Babe Ruth. How many times? 72 times. 2 home runs in a game. He did it 8 times. He had 2 homers in a game 8 times in 1927, and he did it 7 times in 1920 and 1928. 2 hit games. How many did Babe Ruth have? 2 hits in a game. 600 times he had 2 hits in a game. He had 2 hits in a game 49 times in 1924 and 44 times in 1931. 3 hit games. He had 196 3-hit games. He had 3 hits in a game 23 times in 1923 and 18 times in 1930. 4 hit games. How many did Babe Ruth have? 23 of them. He had 4 hits in a game 4 times, 1927, and 3 times, 1928. 5 hit games. How many did Babe Ruth have? He had 6 of them. And he did it 1 time in each season here, 1918, 1919, 1921, 1922, 1926, and 1927. So he did it 1 time in all those individual years. 5 hits in a game, 6 times. Never had a 6-hit game. 2 runs scored in a game for Babe Ruth. How many times? 2 runs. 416 times. He had 42 2 runs scored in a game 42 times in 1920 and 39 times in 1921. 3 runs scored in a game. How many times for Babe Ruth? 104 times. His best years, he scored 3 runs in a game 12 times in 1921 and 10 times 1928 and 1930. 4 runs scored in a game. How many times? 11 times. His best years, he did it 3 times in 1923 and 2 times 1926. 4 runs scored in a game. Did you know that Babe Ruth scored 5 runs in one game? One time. 5 runs. His box score. 1926. All right, how about this one? 2 runs batted in a game. His box score. 2 runs batted in. 287 times. He did it 30 times in 1928 and 27 times in 1931. 2 RBI games. 3 RBI games. How many times? 185 times. His best year, 17 times 1927, 15 times 1921. 4 runs batted in a game, box score. 70 times. His best year, 10 times 1929 and 8 times 1921. All right, here we go. 5 runs batted in a game. 17 times. He did it 3 times in 1922 and 3 times 1927 as far as individual seasons. All right. 6 runs batted in a game. How many times for Babe Ruth? 7 times. He did it 2 times in 1926 and 1932. And then Babe Ruth had 7 runs batted in one game 4 times. He did it 2 times in 1929 as far as doing it multiple times in one season. How about that? You want me to recap? I just went over all of it. But to recap quickly. Best hitting streak, 26 games. Multi-hit games, 810. 3 homer games, 4 times. 2 homers in a game, 72 times. 2 hit games, 600 times. 3 hit games, 196 times. 4 hit games, 23 times. 5 hit games, 6 times. 2 runs scored in a game, 416 times. 3 runs scored in a game, 104. 4 runs scored in a game, 11 times. And he had 5 runs scored in a game. These are all box scores. 2 runs batted in a game, 287 times. 3 runs batted in a game, 185 times. 4 runs batted in a game, 70 times. 5 runs batted in a game, 17 times. 6 runs batted in a game, 7 times, and he had 7 runs batted in one game. You name me another player with stats and box scores like that. Comparable. Ty Cobb, he's got some good lines, good box scores. In fact, we're going to go over him next as far as his box scores. That's going to be my next series of videos. Ty Cobb's box scores from 1905 to 1928. Does Ted Williams match Babe Ruth? No. Roger Hornsby? No. Ty Cobb? No. Jimmy Fox? No. Henry Aaron? No. Willie Mays? No. Hank Greenberg? No. Joe DiMaggio? No. Honus Wagner? No. Lou Gehrig? No. Babe Ruth stands alone as his box scores being either the number 1 of all time. We got to compare him with Ty Cobb, and we will do that. and compare him with Lou Gehrig, and we will do that. But as of this moment, after finishing this book and looking at all his box scores, I looked at every single game he played. 2,000, whatever it was, 2,500. How many games was it? See, I got it in here. How many games did Babe Ruth play? I've got it here. I've got it here. Bear with me. How many games did Babe Ruth play? $2,544 regular and postseason games. I looked at every one of them. 2,544. How about that? All right, we're done with Babe Ruth's box scores. Our next book. In fact, I wrote the book, and I will show it to you next video. Ty Cobb's box scores. Where does he rank? We'll talk to you later. I'm out.